Hello, everyone, and welcome to Police Off the Cuff After Hours. This is Real Crime Stories. Like I say all the time, we have an unbelievable show tonight, but I swear I mean it this time. I mean it every time. But we do have an unbelievable show tonight, and I'll introduce myself first. I'm your host, Bill Cannon. I'm a retired 27-year NYPD veteran. I worked for 16 years in the Detective Bureau. I was a sergeant for 22 years, and I retired out of Manhattan North Homicide Squad. Tonight, we have two extraordinary guests that not only had unbelievable careers prior to now, but they're doing amazing things now. First, I'm going to introduce you to Bob Mladanich. Don't try to spell that last name. It's pretty damn hard to spell. But Bob is a retired detective. He was 20 years and out from the 6-6 squad. He's an investigator, a private investigator. He also is an author. He's written 4 books. He's an expert on the case we want to speak about tonight, Joel Rifkin. In fact, he went to the same high school as Joel Rifkin on Long Island, East Meadow High School. And I went to the same college as Joel Rifkin. I went to Nassau Community, and I didn't become a serial killer. I don't know if that college had anything to do with it. Anyway, Bob is also an actor, and he opens up the scene of The Irishman. And I didn't pull up any pictures because I don't want them to give me a copyright strike on this podcast. But Bob is a jack of all trades, and now he's going to be, I believe, an MSW, a Master of Social Work. He's going to be a therapist, correct, Bob?
Well, I already am. I'm licensed now in Connecticut and New York, and I will be hanging a shingle very shortly. Wow. So if you need any help, any marital problems, I'm the man to come to.
I got mad PSD, but I won't go to you because you won't understand me. Anyway, our other guest is the amazing, and I don't say this lightly, Barbara Butcher, who is a retired chief of staff from the New York City Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. And she also happens to be an actress. She's an author. She's writing a book right now, and she's one hell of a funny lady, too. I think she could have been a great stand-up comic if she put her mind to that, but she could do anything that she put her mind to. But she is an expert on, pathology, and she was a medico-legal investigator. A few folks that don't know what that is, those are the people that come in the Tyvek suits to the homicide scene. Although back in the day, Barbara wore, fishnet stockings and high heels because she thought this was a TV show. She didn't know it was the real thing. But anyway, they do the death examination at the scene, among other things, and they speak to the investigators. Anyway, what a perfect team here. Tonight, we're going to cover the case of Long Island's, probably New York State's, maybe one of the United States' most prolific serial killers, Joel Rifkin. And Bob Mladanich, in fact, he wrote a book. This is the book on the screen, From the Mouth of the Monster. And he wrote he interviewed Joel Rifkin, and I believe they were actually friends in growing up in East Meadow, Long Island. Without further ado, Bob Mladanich.
Yeah, thanks, Bill. And just a minor correction. I did grow up on Long Island in Huntington, New York. But I went to college with Joel at the State University at Brockport. Wow. And that was after he left Farmingdale, where you might have been schoolmates with him. But then he went to
Nassau Community.
He did. He went there for 2 years, and then he transferred up to Brockport. And I met him in the journalism department. Wow. And we were both journalism students, and I had gotten my very first paid assignment in 1979 to cover a boxing match in Rochester, New York. And I desperately needed a photographer. I had told the person that hired me that I could take photos as well as I could write, which was a total misrepresentation.
Let's face it.
Yes, it was. I just wanted the job. I wanted the $50 job so bad just to have my name, my byline on something. So I went to the journalism department, and I knew everybody there because I'd been there for 3 years already. And I asked if they could recommend somebody from their photography department had a great reputation. And they introduced me to Joel, who was like their wonder boy of the photography club. And that was how we met.
A serial killer to be your photographer for a boxing match.
And, what made that particularly newsworthy, though, Bill, was there was a riot at the arena that night. the local favorite wound up winning a fight that he deserved to lose. And much to our surprise, the crowd, the pro Rocky Fratto crowd, went nuts. There was a terrible riot. The police came, and Joel and I found ourselves on our very first paid assignment, the extra excitement of going into Rochester and trying to peddle the photographs to the 2 daily newspapers up there. So it was a really exciting, formative experience for the both of us.
And so all of these things, what year was this anyway?
This was in October 1979.
So this is 10 or 11, about 10 years before he became a serial killer.
Yeah, I think he killed his first victim in 1988.
And what did he do he never graduated college, right?
No, he didn't graduate. He dropped out he never came back for the following semester. And I was a little disappointed because I was very impressed with his photographic ability. And he was kind of awkward and, geeky, but a lot of people at that age are, especially in college. But I really thought that he had tremendous talent. And when I heard that he dropped out, I kind of had this fantasy that he was out there shooting for National Geographic magazine or something, or Life magazine. He was really that good. He was, and he was very brave because it was a really violent riot. There were chairs flying through the air, bottles, projectiles, and he was up there with his camera up in the air, firing away, and he really got some tremendous photos and showed, courage under fire.
He was one hell of a brave serial killer even back then,
Well, I don't think he was brave at all because he actually admitted to me in one of my 5 or 6 interviews with him that he preyed on the weakest and the frailest. So he admitted that, which I found kind of surprising.
Right. Barbara, I want to ask you, now I'm sure you know a bit about Joel Rifkin's background. It's the classic case of the bullied nerd,
Right.
But not all bullied nerds become serial killers. Would you maybe comment upon that, Barbara?
Yeah, and thank God they don't, because there's an enormous amount of bullying that goes along with childhood, and it's really pretty awful. From what I read about Joel Rifkin, he had a pretty rough time. He had a dyslexia, undiagnosed, and he was socially awkward and physically awkward. And there was some story about him that he thought maybe his way to a social life was to join the track team. And so he tried to run track, and it didn't work out too good, and that made him even a bigger target. Now he was a loser too. But the anger that builds up in a teenager, in a kid, has to find some expression. And if it's buried and it's held in, it turns to depression and drug addiction, etc. But he held that anger and he held that hurt, and then he found a good way to release it, and that was against weak, helpless girls, young women, who ostensibly had very few people caring about them. So, if you target sex workers, no one's going to come chasing after you.
Right. He was also an adopted kid.
Yeah.
So he was adopted by, I believe, a Jewish couple who supposedly his dad was like a brilliant mathematical guy, like an architect or something. And his dad was also supposedly an excellent athlete. And he was so disappointed that Joel couldn't catch a baseball, couldn't do a thing. And he felt like a loser in his father's eyes, correct?
Yeah, Joel said that his father really tried to be patient with him and went out of his way to teach him how to catch a ball, but the ball used to bounce off his chest. And he would sit down with him and go over mathematical problems, and Joel just couldn't get them. And eventually his father would just get exasperated. And that was a great source of angst for Joel growing up. He felt like a tremendous disappointment in his father's eyes. And later on in life, when Joel was floundering and he was in his 20s and his father developed very advanced prostate cancer that had metastasized throughout his body. His father told him he was going to give him one last chance to make something of himself, and he was going to pay for 2 college courses at Nassau Community. And he said they had to be hard courses. They couldn't be easy courses. So Joel took biology, and he took one other course that was equally challenging, and he got A's on both of them. And he was eager to report to his father in the hospital that he got 2 A's. And when he got to the hospital, he found out that his father had purposely overdosed on some medication. And Joel felt, and they did not put this in a recent TV show the TV interview that I did, but I thought it was really important. And I was surprised they didn't add this in, but it said that Joel said that he believed in his heart, even to this day, that his father couldn't afford to have another Joel failure. And that's why he took himself out before he found out that he probably got 2 D's or 2 F's.
That's a little severe for taking a course, though, right?
I'm sorry?
That's a little severe of a reaction that someone would have if you failed a course,
But Joel said that he was, his whole 28 years up until that point, he was such a constant source of disappointment to his father. Not so much of his mother, but especially his father, and that he caused his father so much pain and disappointment. And as a result, Joel felt such an immense failure that I think that might have put him over the edge.
Yeah.
Because he killed his first person shortly after that.
Barbara, does that sound familiar to any other serial killers that you may have look at them personality-wise as failures? I mean, you talk about organized and disorganized offenders. He had the characteristics of both, really.
Yeah, that's a good point. What I notice about Joel Rifkin in comparison to some of the other serial killers like John Wayne Gacy or Ted Bundy, that he was different than either one of them, in that, like, Ted Bundy, for instance, was a very charismatic person. John Wayne Gacy was a very self-actualized, powerful person. He felt confident and sure and all kinds of things. And Joel Rifkin was very much not like he had none of those characteristics. He seemed like kind of a nerd. And I wonder, Bob, in college, did he ever date a girl or try to date a girl or have
He had a girlfriend in college who I met very briefly once, but he later told me that by the time he was in college, he had this secret sex life that had begun even before he went away to school. So it happened, he started getting sexual experiences with prostitutes on Long Island before he went away to 400 miles away to school. And he had developed such an affinity for that type of sex, just paying for it and pretty much having it his way very quickly and expeditiously. And that was the kind of sex he had even in his relationship with this young girl. So he felt, he didn't realize this then when he was 20 years old, but he realized later that it really wasn't much of a depthful relationship, because he was kind of looking at her just as another prostitute without even realizing it, emotionally and physically.
Well, Bob, did he maybe target prostitutes in regards to sex because he just didn't want to have any intimate connection with them other than the sex? I mean, on an intellectual way,
Well, one thing that he said that made sense, and I've read this with other serial killers, he didn't feel that he was killing a human being. He felt like what he was attacking was a profession. He was attacking the prostitution profession. And in the beginning, he said he kind of hoped after the first murder, rather than exhilaration, he was kind of hoping that the fear and the paranoia that he felt after the first one might take away the desire to actually continue, living a life where all he was obsessed with being with prostitutes. But unfortunately, that didn't work. And one other thing that he said that I found very profound was when he depersonalized these women, he said he liked to make wartime analogies and also sporting analogies. And the wartime analogy that I found particularly interesting was it wasn't like I was killing a person or a woman or even a prostitute. By the fact that I was killing a prostitute, it was like in wartime shooting down a plane or sinking a ship. You're shooting an object. You're not killing people that are in that ship or on that plane. And that was how he viewed each of these individuals that he killed. That he was killing a profession.
Yeah, he needed to dehumanize them in order to be able to kill them. Barbara, you want to touch upon that?
Well, what I'm wondering, was he, from what I've read, it didn't seem like he was particularly sadistic with them. He didn't prolong their deaths.
No, he definitely didn't do that.
He bludgeoned with objects, and then if they weren't dead from that, he'd strangle them. So he didn't have that sadistic quality like the Golden State guy who just loved to make them suffer and prolong it, and feel their terror, which to me is the scariest kind of serial killer, is that sadistic type. But it seemed like Rifkin, when he was done, he was disposing of them as objects. I'm done with this now. I'll kill it. He'd bludgeon them, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. But no, he even talked a little ritualistically about cutting them up. He even discussed cutting them up with an X-Acto knife. And I expressed some incredulousness. I said, you can dissect somebody with an X-Acto knife, and he said, absolutely. You just cut around the tendons or the ligaments, and you pop the bones out. But he seemed to enjoy that as part of almost like a logistical chore. I didn't get the impression he really relished in doing it, but he seemed to pride himself on, kind of being a job well done. Like he knew how to finish the job, bring the job to completion.
Yeah. Let's talk about, it seemed like most of his prostitute victims he picked up in New York City and then brought them back to his home in East Meadow, Long Island. Usually his mother and his sister would be away, and he'd kill them down in his basement. And then he would dump them back in New York City, which it's not all of them, but most of them. And
that wasn't really most of them, Bill. That was only about 3 or 4 of the 17. But most of them he killed in his car.
Oh, most of them he killed was not in the basement.
Yeah, the ones he brought home to Long Island, he killed them in the living room or the bedroom, and then took them in the basement and dissected them.
Oh, okay. And then, curiously, he would drive to New York City and dump the bodies and body parts in different places.
I think Joel kind of viewed the city as this wild place where, back then it was a wild place, as we know. And it was also a place where you could pretty much get away with anything. And I think he figured if I just dump them in different parts of New York City, nobody's ever going to make the connection that this leg belongs to this arm or this torso. And as we know, crime was so rampant in the 1980s and the early 1990s, and there was really no connection between precincts and boroughs. And it was easy to get away with. There were no cameras all over the place. It was very easy to get away with things.
Well, I'm sorry, Barbara, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry, Bill. I was just going to say that's when I first came on the job, early 90s, when we were getting 2,400 homicides a year. Now, if you get 350, it's the alarm bells go off. We had 2,420 something a year then, and I remember I could get a sex worker killing 3 or 4 times a week, and it was no particular cause for alarm. We'd find girls over by behind the bus terminal on 40 in the 40s, West 40s, over by
42nd,
the
yeah.
Amtrak yards. Just girls killed and left there. And it seemed to be kind of routine. And then in the hot sheet motels, like the one up, what do they call it? The Park up in Harlem
Right.
on 110th. They just kill the girls and leave them there. So it wasn't cause for alarm at the time. And it's easy to see how he could just do this with impunity.
Well, you
And-
know, Barbara, as far as also connecting cases together, I don't think New York City had the first DNA hit until 1997. It was Aaron Key, the serial killer.
Right.
That's right.
So
My
people
case,
listening now may think, oh, why didn't they just, put all of these things together with DNA, which is also the problem with the Gilgo. You knew I was going to mention the Gilgo Beach murders, because they were dumped like 10 years after they actually, or they found them 10 years after they were murdered. And there was no DNA recovered from any of them that we know, that the general public knows.
Right.
It seems like they keep teasing us, putting out little other tidbits of evidence that they should have put out years ago, that I don't know why they were holding some of it, like that belt they put out recently that said, oh, this is the perpetrator's belt. I don't know how they know that, but so we got to realize when we're talking about case linkage, there was no DNA in 1991 when he first started, or 88, 89 when he first started his killing spree.
and there was no communication there was no real-time crime center. There were no linkages between precincts. I mean, I remember if somebody went missing in Manhattan, but they lived in Brooklyn, they had to go report it, and the family had to report it in Brooklyn. But then nobody told the folks in Manhattan. And we'd have a dead body that matched the Brooklyn guy, but nobody knew it. And it took years.
Isn't that so amazing? And we think about something now for the folks listening. I forget exactly what year it was, but a complaint follow-up that's done by a detective. Anyone that says anything to a detective, he has to type a complaint follow-up, which is referred to as a DD5 in police lingo. Now, these DD5s used to be in 6 carbons, and the PAA would rip them and send them which was so ridiculous, to the different locations. Now we actually went to computers, because the NYPD had been hitting 2 rocks together to make a spark for years, right? I think we were the last ones to get these computers. Now the DD5 system was all integrated, so if a detective in the 7-9 was looking for a guy named, I don't want to use the name Pito because it's so common, right? But say he was looking for Pito, and you were, whoa, look, he's looking for this. It's the same guy. And that's how you would find that out. Voila, what you were talking about before, Barbara. No one talked to each other. And now you can actually even search the DD5 system and find, different information.
Yeah. Now it's hard to get away with anything. They've got your picture on video, committing the crime, walking to it and walking home. So they get everything, the work, the commute, the whole business. But Joel Rifkin was probably in the last period when you could get away with absolutely anything, as long as you didn't kill a well-to-do white woman on Park Avenue.
Right.
It was just the times. The police department was overwhelmed. The whole criminal justice system was overwhelmed, and things fell by the wayside.
So, Barbara, back then, when they found remains, what was the job? What did the office of the chief medical examiner, what did they do to link stuff together then?
The identification back then, if you didn't have fingerprints, and if you had, we do a dental examination and look for evidence of dental work. But if you didn't have an idea of who that person could be, of a dentist's records that you could compare to, there's no ID. And we didn't routinely use forensic anthropologists then. Like now, there's a whole team of them. They can tell you age, race, diet, even from just a bare skeleton. They can get an enormous amount of information now about a person. And the IDs made on the Gilgo Beach victims were largely made because of the work of the New York City medical examiner's office forensic anthropology team. They went out to Suffolk and Nassau and helped out there. But, without DNA, it was mighty hard. And you'll notice the very first victim, he called her Susie. That was around 88, 89.
Yes.
And so her remains were found scattered in the golf course, and her legs were found somewhere else. She wasn't identified for 24 years. 24 years. And she turned out to be a woman named Heidi Balch, 25-year-old girl. And she was identified after 24 years. And a lot of that is due to the NamUs system. It's an online system where you can enter information about a loved one who's missing or a friend. And then medical examiners' offices, they enter their information on all the unclaimed and unidentified bodies. And then police departments put their info in. If you get a match, beautiful.
Right. I don't want to get off topic, and we'll get right back to Joel, but someone put in the chat that some skeletal remains were just found by a fisherman in Mastic Beach on Sunday.
That's right.
Which, again, that's all the amateur investigators on YouTube that are all on that, what's it called? LISK, L-I-S-K, the Long Island serial killer. And then you got that very colorful attorney with the bow tie who's, he's doing his own investigation too. But right away, of course, everyone's saying, this is another Gilgo Beach murder, and I don't know what the sexes of the skeletal remains are yet. I don't think they've released that yet, just that they found skeletal remains. So even when we get back to Joel Rifkin, is there any possibility whatsoever that he could have been the Gilgo Beach killer?
I think it's been determined. He was looked at for that, as far as I know, unless there's something that the authorities are not releasing. But I think that most of the women in the Gilgo Beach murders were last seen, alive long after Joel was in prison. So I don't think he's responsible for any of them. But just one thing as a quick aside, there were, at the time of his arrest, there were about 5 victims that became known, but they had never been reported missing. And there's still three women that have never been recovered. And he's told them, one of them, I think he said he put in a 50-gallon drum, and it probably rolled, out into the sea. But the fact that so many of these women were so marginalized that their families didn't even report them missing, that obviously added a very tough dimension to the investigation as well.
Yeah.
No, 100%. I mean, obviously most prostitutes have if they're on the street, they have a drug problem, right? 90% of the time. And most of them are estranged from their families, In the Gilgo Beach thing, a lot of them were Craigslist escorts, which is maybe one level higher of sex worker than the streetwalker. But I don't want to be killed for saying that. People will be like, oh my God, you're blaming it on the sex. I'm not. I'm just saying the reality of the sex profession. And that's the reality of it.
Yeah. There was an effort by Coyote, the sort of a union for sex workers some years ago, maybe the late 70s. And there was an effort to do more to identify each other and but a lot of the girls were using street names and adopted names. So no one ever knew who they were originally, never knew their real names.
That's right. You tried to run the name Peaches in the New York City crime databases, and the computer would explode.
Yeah.
Peaches. There's 10,000 Peaches in New York City. I have to just go to a quick commercial, guys, and we'll be right back. Something has to pay the bills here.
Of course.
All right, Carol Waters. If you're looking to relocate in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, Carol Waters of the Beach Realty Group has been buying and selling property in the Myrtle Beach area for 11 years now. Carol and her husband, Rob Million, retired FDNY firefighter, also a rollover from the NYPD. They work as a team. Carol's been a multi-million-dollar producer for the past 10 years. They have great knowledge of all aspects of the real estate industry. Carol's well known around the Irish community in New York. She worked in Fitzpatrick's Manhattan Hotel for over 20 years behind the stick. Originally born in the Bronx and brought up in County Mayo, Ireland, contact Carol Waters for all your real estate needs in the Myrtle Beach area. Carol Waters, spell Myrtle Beach at gmail.com, 914-261-6681. Thank you, folks. I hate to go to commercial with such an interesting show, but I have to do it. We're back. Bob, is that your phone? Is that one of your clients in your future?
No, yeah, something. I didn't realize something was on, but I turned it off. Sorry.
So let's talk about now. Here he is. He's a landscaper. He's got one of the worst trucks I think I've ever seen. And I don't know, was he a working landscaper or was he working?
He really wasn't. He would get he got a bunch of jobs, but he never could keep them. He was very irresponsible. He wouldn't show up on time. If he had a weekly contract to cut somebody's lawn, it would never last more than 3 or 4 weeks before they got rid of him. So he was never really able to maintain a job. The only job that he had for a couple of years was a part-time job in a liquor store. And that where he started working as a teenager as like a stock boy. But that was the only real job that he, from my research, that he was able to hold on to for any amount of time. He was completely disheveled and disorganized in all aspects of his personal life.
I mean, you would think that he would be smart enough to know that driving around in a truck like that, missing a license plate with a dead body in the back, probably wasn't a good idea,
I think he was just looking to make a quick run because he was repairing that truck and the body was starting to smell, and he was concerned that his mother, although his mother stayed out of that shed, that she would still smell, the remains. So he just, patchworked the car together enough to probably go 7 or 8 miles, get rid of the body, and then come home and resume work on the vehicle.
Wow.
But I mean, you would have to be a little bit crazy to think that wasn't going to draw attention to you.
I don't think he thought that far ahead. He was very disheveled and disorganized. And I think once he got it into his mind that he had to get rid of that body because of the smell, that became his preoccupation. I'm going to give you one good example of his OCD. You probably remember John Greeny, a retired detective, passed away. Did you know him, Bill? I think he worked. I don't know if I passed through Manhattan North, but he was working in a squad in the Bronx, and they had to go pick up Joel in Suffolk County and bring him to the Bronx to be arraigned for a murder there. And John had just bought a house, and he loved gardening and everything. So he was trying to engage Joel on the way. He knew he couldn't speak with him because he had a lawyer, but they were talking about gardening. And he said he found him very pleasant. So they put him in the cell in the 4-0, and he treated him well. He got him some food and everything. But he said there was a little tiny crack in the wall, in the concrete wall, in the cell. And he said he observed Joel sort of zero in on that within 5 minutes of getting into the cell. And then for the next 7 or 8 hours, he just was preoccupied with making it bigger and, and scratching it and scraping it with his fingernail, then blowing on it, blowing the dust away, then looking at it and examining his handiwork. And he said it was amazing just to watch him, total preoccupation for about 2 hours, about 8 hours, actually.
But I would think, Barbara, correct me if I'm wrong, I would say that that's a trait of a disorganized offender, wouldn't you?
Yeah, I would feel that way. There's something about the inability to focus on, that looks like a killer. Take that.
This was Barbara doing her fishnet stocking and high heel days.
Yeah. There's the inability to focus on anything worthwhile, like work or social life or people, but then to find a little tiny crack in the wall and all your focus goes in there, that's a sign of a mental disturbance, and
100%.
yeah,
But
I mean,
when he described his first murder, and Bob, he probably described it too. He hit the girl with a howitzer shell.
Yeah, he had bought a howitzer shell at one of those military flea markets. And he said that it was, you got to remember something about him. By that point, he'd been visiting prostitutes for over 10 years. He was with hundreds of them, probably 400 or 500. And he fantasized ever since he saw an Alfred Hitchcock movie where a woman got strangled with a man's tie. It was a 1974 movie, Frenzy. He fantasized about killing every woman he was with. So in this case, he thought it was just going to be another part of the fantasy, but then she kept asking for more money and more drugs, and he just snapped and he grabbed the shell and he just started hitting her with the shell, thought she was dead, and then she popped back up and engaged in a fight for her life, and she actually bit him, and before she was finally killed.
Now, who was the lead investigative agency in these murders?
The state police.
The state police. That's unusual, isn't it?
Well, they had arrested him. They were the ones that the state police were the ones that arrested him, and then they got the initial confession out of him. And then they assumed pretty much the rest of the investigation.
So they were the lead investigative agency. But how about other precincts, say in New York City or even Long Island, that have cases, that have bodies? They're not going to give them to the state police.
No. But they all got called in at various times, and Joel was eventually arraigned in Queens, Brooklyn, Manhattan, and Nassau County on different murders. And Suffolk County too.
That's probably one of the things that makes it so difficult in the Gilgo case too, is there's so many different hands in it. I know a couple of the cases were in Nassau County, right? But most of the cases were in Suffolk, correct, Barbara?
Yep. And that reminds me, one of the victims, Lauren Marquez, she was found in 93 in the Pine Barrens,
right,
on Long Island. And if I recall correctly, of the Gilgo cases, a piece of a remain was found in the Pine Barrens that related back to a body at Gilgo.
That sounds familiar, yeah.
Wasn't the guy Bitroff who was arrested? Didn't he kill 2 prostitutes and dump them in the Pine Barrens?
Yeah, and Bitroff is from Manorville, which is the next town over from Mastic. So it's possible that Bitroff could be responsible for that Mastic case, assuming it's even a woman and it's the victim of a serial killer.
Yeah, the Manorville definitely relates to Gilgo, because I think there was a head found in Manorville that came from a body in Gilgo. And
right, that's right. Yep, you're right.
Yeah. And then the Pine Barrens, there was some other relation between the remains found in each place.
There was the burlap bags that some of the Gilgo victims were wrapped in, and the biggest supplier of burlap bags was from Manor Haven. Right. Yeah. And he committed suicide after. So the plot thickens. I'm not saying that, there's a possibility he could have had something to do with it, but I don't know enough about.
And do you remember how that guy Bitroff was captured?
No.
He wasn't even a suspect, and he was kind of unknown to the police. Yeah, he might have had a couple of drunken driving arrests, maybe a bar fight or something. But they got DNA from one of the victims and it was matched to his brother, who had put in one of those ancestry.com type things. And they knew it wasn't the brother, but they could tell it was the relative of this person. So that's how specific this DNA evidence is nowadays. So anybody that's put in one of those ancestry things that did something 30, 40 years ago really should be sweating nowadays.
Yeah, my brothers and sisters are all sweating now that I put mine in.
Especially with that last name Butcher, you can't live that down,
I know.
Change it to Boucher.
That's right. And you were from Massapequa too, right?
That's right. And actually, I lived in East Meadow, not far from Joel Rifkin, and I went.
You have the right to remain silent.
And that was my first apartment. I was like 18, 19 years old. And then I went to Nassau Community briefly too. But,
wow, look at all the superstars that went to Nassau Community. Myself,
know.
Barbara Butcher, Joel Rifkin. Oh my God. But none of us became serial killers though, right?
No, but we got close enough to it, didn't we?
Yeah.
In our way.
I was a product of the state system, Nassau, Buffalo State College, and CUNY, John Jay,
Yeah.
AA, BAMS, and BMF. I won't tell you what a BMF is, but.
And I think you're from Long Island also, right?
I grew up in Levittown, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Long Island is well represented on this show tonight.
That's right. That's right.
Bob, I wanted to ask you something too about. I'm sorry, Bill. I'm like.
Barbara, go ahead. But look, everyone's free to talk on this show. There's no stars on the show except me. No, just kidding.
Bob, when Rifkin described all his killings to the police, to the state police and others, and he described where he put the remains and things like that. Did he take any pride in that? Any pride of ownership, if you will? Or
I'm sorry, but Barbara, finish your question.
Or did he just sort of lay it out like, well, this happened, that happened? Or did he take some pride in how he hid the girls and how he got away with it for so long?
Some of the investigators that I've seen interviewed have interpreted his actions and his affect as taking pride. I know the Nassau County prosecutor, Fred Klein, felt as if he had taken pride in the fact that this was, the one thing in life that he did well. But in my interviews with him, on a strictly personal level and how he related to me, it didn't seem as if he took any pride. He didn't seem, he actually seemed kind of emotionless with me. And one of the reasons for that might be the fact that since he'd been imprisoned, he was on some medication. He didn't tell me what it was, but it was a mood medication. So maybe his effect was affected by that. But my guess is that he probably would have taken a little bit of pride in the fact that he was killed more people in New York than anybody else. Because I remember when I was writing to him and visiting him on a regular basis, there was going to be a special, I think it was called The Mind of a Murderer, and they were going to do PET scans on his brain, and he was going to be taken to, I think, Elmira Hospital for 3 days, and they were going to do all sorts of tests. And he wrote me a letter. This is before the internet, or the very early days of the internet when people still wrote letters. And he wrote like a little marquee, like a movie marquee, and it said "Mind of a Murderer, Joel Rifkin." And I remember he said, "This be me." Wow. So obviously, I think he did take some pride in the fact that he did that well.
There was I don't know where I heard.
Someone got their phone on or radio on. The phone's feeding back.
I got nothing on here. Let me just turn it. Was that a little better?
Yeah, something was feeding back.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry.
I had heard somewhere that he took a certain amount of satisfaction in thinking about the bullying he endured in high school and how he was a nobody, and now he felt like, well, I showed them. Look what I did something.
Yeah, that was mentioned by the prosecutor in Nassau County. Um, I never personally saw that in his discussions with me, but I think it certainly would make sense, and
Yeah.
it's a viable theory.
Yeah. And do you keep in touch with him now?
I did. I kept in touch with him for the longest time. We would exchange Christmas cards, and even though he was Jewish, he would always send me a Christmas card. And if there were articles I thought would interest him, I would send them to him. Like when his mother's house was sold when she passed away, I sent him that article. But for some reason, he just stopped corresponding with me maybe 7 or 8 years ago. I don't know why. I did send him an article about this, not this interview, but an interview I did about a month ago. And I haven't heard back from him. So I don't know why that is. It's possible, in the housing unit that he's in, maybe people say, why are you communicating with this guy? He's a former cop or something, or he's taking advantage of you or something. But it ended very abruptly. And I was a little disappointed about that.
Yeah. And I understand he was in solitary confinement for a period of 4 years?
When I first visited him in Attica, he had been in solitary confinement for 5 years. And he sued to get out of there. He wanted to go to Clinton Correctional Facility because they have a special housing unit that's specifically made for sex offenders and very high profile inmates. So it's like a separate building behind the main building. And that's where he's been ever since he went to Clinton. And he is very happy there. He has a garden. He gets to tend to a garden. And he says that he told me, I belong in prison. I should never get out of prison. And I'm actually much more functional than I ever was out in the world here. But that also could be a lot of the medication talking also.
Yeah.
The medication might be having a very positive effect on him.
Does he get continued psychological analysis, psychological care?
No, he doesn't. He's just on medication management. He doesn't get any psychological care whatsoever. And he seems very content. That doesn't seem, he says he's very content.
One thing just about serial killers, period, it's much, much tougher now to become a serial killer because they're going to get caught much earlier in their career. Things like Barbara mentioned, video is everywhere. Right?
Yep.
That has made the life of a homicide investigator so much easier. License plate readers, cameras at toll booths, Easy Pass. We mentioned the DD5 system, people talking to each other. And of course, the number one scientific breakthrough of the 21st century in criminology, DNA. It's so much harder, thank God, for someone to become a serial killer.
Yeah. And back in 1990 or 91, when DNA was just a phrase we heard about, but we really didn't know anything about, I had a homicide in the 6-6 where a glove was left behind. There were two perps, and one glove was left behind. The store owner was killed. We wound up catching the guy who wasn't wearing the glove, and he gave up the guy that was wearing the glove. So that's how we caught the guy with the glove. But obviously, we didn't want to tell the guy that his friend gave him up because we wanted to get a separate confession. So we said, well, how did you catch me? And I was thinking of telling him, well, the glove, DNA. But I said, he's never going to fall for that. And he said to me, the glove, right? DNA. I said, yep. And I couldn't believe this guy could be so stupid. DNA was in its infancy. And I thought I pulled the biggest trick of my career. But it's certainly come a long way since then.
Well, it's some of the, like Barbara mentioned, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner made huge advances in DNA during the identification system for 9/11. You want to speak upon that, Barbara?
Yeah, that's, the greatest tragedy in this country. 9/11 had, if anything good came out of it, if it's possible to say that, it's that it advanced DNA technology about 3 generations, maybe 25, 30 years, because everything we did was poured into getting identifications of those people and for their families. And we were working with the most minuscule amount of biological material. It got to the point where we'd have a test tube with a tiny little fragment of flesh in it. And we'd get a DNA identification from that tiny piece of biological material. And then we'd have to go to the family and say, we got an ID. The bad news is we had to use every little bit of matter that we had to get the test. And the families would bury the test tube that it had been in. That's how crazy it got. The forces at play there were so great, the fire, the vaporization, the explosive forces. That's why there's still, nearly 40% of the people, or 38%, something like that, who haven't been identified. Just vaporization. But can you imagine?
Bob, I remember, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I remember Dr. Hirsch gave a speech. Dr. Hirsch, for you folks out there, he was the chief medical examiner of New York City during 9/11. And he gave a speech at the homicide course. And he had said that the reality is that many of the bodies, like you just said, were vaporized. And although the families hate to hear that, it's the absolute truth. He goes, never in the history of mankind has the amount of force gone straight down into the ground with the weight of all the building and the brick and the steel and all that stuff. And that's what he said. And I remember Dr. Floenbaum, who was the second guy in charge, right?
Right.
He had told us that Hirsch gave a speech to some, 5,000 doctors or something like that. And after he'd given the speech, they gave him a standing ovation.
Yeah.
Which must have been just an incredible thing, right?
Yeah. But, we learned so much from doing that identification effort, which is still going on, by the way, 20 years later. Hirsch made a promise. We will do whatever it takes for as long as it takes till every person's identified. That could go on for the next 100 years. But the truth is, what we learned from that enabled us to do DNA work on crimes where we were doing gun swabs just off a trigger, where a gun had been held by maybe 3 perps. And we were able to discern the 3 different profiles on that DNA from one swab. Or steering wheels. We did that for a while on stolen vehicles. But we were getting DNA off everything. And it's all because of what we learned during that identification effort. So didn't all work out great in terms of what we learned, like the low copy DNA was too sensitive. And you have to stop doing it because you could pick up 10 profiles on a weapon. It was just so incredibly sensitive that it became oversensitive. So which of those 10 people that handled that gun was the actual perpetrator? Who knows?
Right.
It got that crazy.
Well, it's just like, the defense would love to be able to impinge the credibility of DNA when it is in the favor of the prosecution. However, DNA has also cleared many people who weren't guilty.
Absolutely right. Yeah.
Right.
Oh, there's so many people, like the Innocence Project has worked hard to get people who were exonerated after many years by DNA.
Yeah. People are telling me to stay on the topic, so I got off Joel Rifkin now, and we're getting a DNA lecture from the former OCME Chief of Staff Barbara Butcher. I'll get back to the topic with Bob Mladanich, who is the expert on the Joel Rifkin case. And it seemed that once he was arrested, though, the mystery behind this and whether he had in fact done a lot more murders than he was charged with. I think he maybe admitted to 17 and they only charged him with 9, and he was sentenced to 203 years in prison. I don't know, maybe if Cuomo stays governor, he might be paroled. I don't know, but right
He'll
now,
get out at that 55 and over law.
Yeah,
that elder law. If you're
I
55,
qualify for the 55 and older law. I'm getting out. Do you think there's any possibility of that?
It's possible, absolutely.
Why did they stop? Why did they try him for 9?
I think that they had him. He already had a 200-year sentence, and they probably just wanted to save the expense of another trial. I know that one county, I don't remember which one, but there's some legal term where they reserve the right to charge later or something if he gets out on some appeal or something. But I think it just got so expensive trying him, and he actually pled guilty. He only went on trial, I believe, in Suffolk County, and he pled guilty in a couple of cases in Queens, and Nassau and Suffolk he went on trial. But in New York City, he pled guilty to all the cases.
Yeah.
Were the investigators satisfied that they had identified every case that he was involved in? Or
Well, no, there's actually, I got a lot of calls after this show aired from old friends. One friend of mine in the 3-4, there was a body up there that was never identified. And had he known about this earlier, he would have loved to have a chance to speak to Rifkin about that body. And then there's a couple of Brooklyn cases where the women are still unidentified. And I spoke to one of those detectives, and he said he still thinks about it on a constant basis. And he's frustrated that one was never solved because he knows he did it. But, he'd like to know more about where she was. I was able to put in the book where he was, everything I thought he remembered about where he picked up this woman. But it wasn't enough for them to, even years later, identify who she was. But everybody kind of wants a crack at him now. And I know, like, even in the past 5 years, detectives go up there on a regular basis. They even went up there, during the Gilgo investigation, just to ask him, for intelligence purposes about how he might have done it, things like that.
I find that almost like going to a medium,
Yeah, exactly.
It's the same level of credibility. Has no credibility whatsoever.
No, but I'm sure that there was another. At least that was the outward reason.
But people still go to mediums, and there's never been a homicide case in the history of mankind that's been solved by a medium. But they still want to do it.
Yep.
Like, I just don't get it. You know something? I'm going to either go to a medium or Joel Rifkin. I don't know which one should I do.
No, but I think that was just a ruse, that they used to maybe gather. There might have been some women that might have last been seen around the time he went to jail. So they thought just possibly he might have had something.
Well, it's like showbiz stuff, like with Hannibal Lecter. How would you have done it?
Right.
It's like,
and I'm sure Joel would probably enjoy that. I think he would enjoy that, being viewed as the expert, given because one of the things that he told me that he was actually very proud of was he had written this 23-page manifesto called the Aloha House, and Aloha in Hebrew means sanctuary, and the Aloha House was a 23-page manifesto about a place where women on the streets could go. They could learn parenting skills, life. Writing checks, taking care of families, taking care of themselves. And the words that he described that sent a little bit of a chill through me is it would teach them how to protect themselves from people like me, sheep's and wolves clothing.
Wow.
And so he knows what he is, what he was. He never portrayed himself as anything different. Although he discussed being a victim and everything as a bullying victim, he never seemed to look for sympathy for what he did. He admitted that he preyed on the weak and the vulnerable because he didn't want to fight with them. He didn't want any resistance. So he was very truthful. And I found myself, once my oldest child was born, I found myself getting mad at him because, the way he was talking about killing women, prior to that, I viewed myself as this consummate professional because I was able to remain so impassive. But then I said, I can't be mad at this guy for, I asked him to be open and honest with me, and it's not fair that now I want to judge him. So it was a little hard for me to remain impassive after my oldest daughter was born.
Yeah, I mean, I see him as he seems like a nerd and a very timid guy, but yet he comes to life to kill women, which is really sort of pathetic, Like, why wouldn't he be violent with another man,
Because he's a coward. And if he was walking on the street and a well-dressed woman bumped into him or he bumped into her and she called him a name or said, "Watch where you're going," and called him an idiot or something, I don't think she would be in any danger. I think he was only dangerous in the dead of night with an 85-pound, crack-addicted waif. I think anybody else would scare the daylights out of him.
Yeah.
Male and female.
Yeah. Yeah.
Go ahead, Barbara. You want to say something?
Yeah, and this is a little weird. I'm not even sure how to say it, but I mean, the guy never had a chance. He was born, he was given up, he was dyslexic, he was clumsy, he was unattractive, and he was picked on constantly. He never had a chance to develop into a person. And I mean, that doesn't, believe me, I'm not excusing anything here. My God, no. But he never had a chance to develop a personality because he didn't have relationships.
Right.
So the idea that he would go after weak, vulnerable people it fits. He didn't have personality enough to do like Ted Bundy, to seduce people, or even Aaron Key, another serial killer you don't hear much about, but he raped and killed girls between 13, 15, as old as 19 years old, but he had a seductive pattern that he went after them. Joel Rifkin was a loser from the get-go.
Right.
And not only that, Barbara and Bill, but from the time he was a little kid in second and third grade, he was scheming. And when I say scheming, he was scheming for his own survival. He was scheming how to stay in school, helping the teacher until the very last minute so he could leave school after everybody else had all left and nobody was there waiting for him to beat the hell out of him. He would scheme how to get to school the minute the bell rang in the morning so he wouldn't get beat up with going to school. So his whole life was spent, kind of in self-preservation mode. It wasn't making friends with others. It wasn't playing on sports teams with others. And the few times he ventured out of his comfort zone, like joining the yearbook staff in high school or joining the track team, he got mocked and ridiculed. He took all the pictures for his high school yearbook, thought he made friends with all these nice people, and then they didn't even invite him to the publication party. And his mother told me that was the only time she had seen him really visibly heartbroken. All the years of getting beat up, having underwear stuffed in his throat and almost choking him to death, he would come home, he would go up in his room, he wouldn't say anything, and he would just retreat into his own head. But his mother said that was the only time she saw him really visibly stricken. Because I think at that point in high school, 11th or 12th grade, he felt like, maybe I can make it with these people by using my artistic abilities. And, that backfired on him.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's reason to have some empathy for him. I don't like to throw that word evil around too much. Because I think he was made. I think he somehow got created. I don't think he was born bad. I don't think he was born bad. I think evil people are maybe kind of born bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. He doesn't feel like an evil person. He feels like a damaged, incomplete person.
Yeah.
And it's pretty awful.
And one other thing he said that seemed truthful to me, and this was actually what intrigued me the most when I saw this on a TV interview when he'd been in jail for about 2 years. And this is what made me want to write to him more than anything. This interested me more than the fact that he killed all these people. Was Geraldo Rivera asked him if he felt bad about all the women that he killed. And he said no, which is very unusual. Usually these guys say, I wish I could turn back the clock. I wish I could, I could die and they could be, brought back to earth. But he says, no, I don't feel bad. I want to, but I can't, and I don't know why. But I want to feel bad. And that's what really piqued my interest more than anything. And I think the next day I penned a letter to him. Yeah. And I didn't hear from him for a few months, but then I penned another one and he responded.
Yeah,
I still think there has to be some type of genetic component to this. I think, he became this, but I think he had it in his genes somehow. And I don't know who his adoptive parents were. I mean, his biological parents were, but I'm sure they were not, they had some kind of genetic defect that he became this serial killer.
Well, I mean, he's been tested. He was tested over and over. He had, 3 or 4 days of PET scans. I think it was Cornell University. They weren't able to find any frontal lobe damage. They haven't found anything yet.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, his biological parents were 2 college students. His father was an Army vet who met a girl, and he was in college, met a girl,
right.
She got pregnant, and that was that. They didn't get married, and I wonder to this day, I guess they know what happened to their son.
Well, he was adopted from that Jewish adoption agency that was involved in that controversy with the 3 identical strangers. That movie that was made.
Yeah, they owned a restaurant in the city for a while.
Yeah,
but
3 brothers.
That adoption agency was up to a lot of chicanery, keeping secrets from birth parents and stuff. I mean, from adoptive parents. So maybe there was some stuff that they did not tell the adoptive parents.
Yeah, that's interesting. That Wise agency was very, very shady. There were a lot of interesting things going on there.
And just one other thing that makes Joel a lot different from other serial killers, there was no pattern there was no like gateway actions as a kid. He didn't torture animals. He didn't pull the wings off of insects. He didn't commit vandalism or arson or things like that. And he also had a very good relationship with his mother, who had a master's degree, which was very unusual for a woman in that era. And the mother had very esoteric interests, such as photography and gardening, that Joel shared with her. So he had a very nice, bountiful relationship, rewarding and fulfilling relationship with his mother. Even though he had problems with his father, there was really no signals that he would dislike women.
Yeah.
I think
he doesn't fit the pattern.
People want to believe that serial killers are smart, they're cunning, their psychological profile is one of a tortured soul and all those things. But lots of times, well, back in this era, people just got away with things because maybe of the ineptitude of law enforcement, or maybe I shouldn't say the ineptitude, just they didn't have the tools and they were
Right.
overwhelmed with work, you know?
Yeah.
You know, guys,
But Joel doesn't fit the pattern of you can't. All the pegs don't go into the hole.
Definitely not. Guys, we're at an hour and 10 minutes, so I think we should moving into our closing ceremonies. And at this point, I always allow you guys to talk. Bob, you got anything you want to plug right now? I know you've written 4 books. You need patience to lay on your couch that you can psychoanalyze. You want to say you want to plug anything?
I want to plug a movie called Modhaven Cash for Keys. I'm the writer, co-writer, and co-producer. It stars an actor by the name of Robert Davi. Everybody knows his face. You probably don't know his name, but you'll know his face. It's going to be on all streaming outlets on July 6th. We just got a distributor. It was filmed in the Modhaven section of the South Bronx in 2017. It's a really nifty, sweet little New York-centric movie. So Modhaven Cash for Keys, July 6th on all your streaming devices.
Bob, you are a man of many talents. You wear many hats. My God. In case something goes wrong, you want to have backup, man. You're never going to go hungry.
We only go through once.
That's right.
Got to make the most
Barbara
of it.
Butcher, one of my favorites of all time of the law enforcement world. What are you doing these days? Let our audience know.
I'm writing a book, My Adventures in Forensics and Death Investigation, 23 years at the medical examiner's office. And it's hard work. Jesus, I had no idea. It was easier doing those cases than it is writing about them, you know.
One chapter at a time.
That's it, one chapter at a time. So I'm hoping it'll be out. It'll be a while. It'll be a year, but
you're doing some acting too, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Barbara's talking to me. Go ahead, Barbara.
Yeah, I've done a few little things. I had that pilot of Mob Mentality that was, you know, I thought was going to be my big break, but COVID killed that. So, we'll see what's next.
Is that DOA, or you think they may revive it?
I don't know. I haven't heard anything from the producer since COVID hit. I mean, what happened is she went out to LA, met with a couple of producers who were interested, and then the country shut down that night. So,
that's what happened to our podcast. We thought we were going to be a national hit. Then all of a sudden COVID hit, and we discovered StreamYard, which is a great thing. So listen, I want to thank both of you guys. I think this was fascinating. And
thank you.
I felt like we somehow underutilized Barbara a little bit. I think she wanted to get into the blood and the guts and the anthropological analysis, but I didn't really have any bones to recover or any teeth that she could take a look at. But I just know, Bob, it's great to be your friend. You've been on the show numerous times, and I hope I can reach out to you again. And
absolutely.
I know Duty Ron is in the chat, and he's salivating right now to get you back on his show, because I think you and I set a record. 54,000 people watched our episode with Duty Ron.
Wow.
I wish I had that following. I'm working hard. And
you're
Bob,
doing a great job, Bill.
I think I may even learn how to spell your name. I've been talking to you so long now. But I want to thank both of you guys for being on this show. I think this was fantastic. And I guess we should say goodnight to everyone.
All right.
Thank you.
Good night, you guys.
Good night, everyone.
Keep up the great work, Bill.
Thanks, man. I appreciate it.